Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here, and today I thought we would talk about a comic, but oh no, what's this? I seem to have accidentally left some pages on my world's greatest bookshelf, and these seems to contain some drawings arranged in a sequential fashion. I wonder what that could be for. Well, anyway, we won't dwell on that. Today we're looking at Jeff Smith's Bone, out from Boneville. I have mentioned Jeff Smith several times. Whenever someone asks me who my favorite cartoonist is, usually the name that pops into my head first is Jeff Smith. I'm not saying that means he's always my favorite cartoonist. Sometimes it depends on my mood. But Jeff Smith, that name pops right into my head. Bone was originally published starting in 1991 as an independent comic book series. I wish I could have collected it back then. But Scholastic started serializing it in graphic novel form around 2004. Maybe even before that. This is the color edition, and this came out a few years after the original black and white editions did. But I have immense high praise for Jeff Smith. If you've encountered this, I'll probably be preaching to the choir because you can sort of see the quality for it yourself. So what I thought we would do is I'm going to flip through this and make some comments on some important points. But if you are familiar with Jeff Smith and you've enjoyed Bone, I kind of want to ask the question, why does Bone work? Because it works in a very particular way. And if you haven't encountered this before, well, then maybe this will just be a good encouragement for you to look at it. So, Bone opens, it's a great opening. They're out in the middle of the desert, wandering alone, and the thing about the first two volumes of Bone is they're very heavy on the comedy. I think to warm you up to the world, to warm you up to the characters, and then gradually the fantasy story element starts creeping its way in, and it becomes more and more like a J.R.R. Tolkien novel. But the first two volumes have a very, humorous Sunday comic strip vibe to them. And the two influences that I see myself and I hear other people discuss in relation to Jeff Smith are Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes and Walt Kelly's Pogo. And I actually had never heard of Pogo before Jeff Smith, and I went and found books of Pogo because of my love for Jeff Smith, and instantly you can see it. The sort of charming animal characters, the sort of down-to-earth dialects they have. This is an artist who paid attention to some of the greats of a previous generation and then worked that into his style. So some of Jeff Smith's strengths include dialogue. The characters' lines read nicely, and he very noticeably, he often uses contractions and sort of down-to-earth speech. So they'll say like the instead of the. And this gives it the flavor of sort of down-to-earth characters. Smiley Bone here. If you haven't watched The Honeymooners, you've missed out on a great part of American history. But Art Carney played the character of Ed Norton in The Honeymooners. And even if you haven't seen The Honeymooners, you've seen Art Carney's character as Barney Rubble from the Flintstones is imitating Art Carney. Yogi Bear is imitating Art Carney. And I definitely think that's what gave Smiley Bone his outfit, his vest, his little hat, his cigar. So I read it in his voice. But maybe one of the interesting things generally about Jeff Smith is his ability to give his characters different voices. So all three of the Bone cousins have this sort of modern speech to them. They're sort of modern average Joes, but each of them are a little different. Phone Bone is the most average Joe, kind of the young, adventurous reader, quiet reader sort. Smiley Bone's a dope, and Phony Bone is kind of like a darker version of Uncle Scrooge because he's a very greedy capitalist. But then when they enter into the valley and the fantasy element starts to come in, then you'll meet a diverse cast of characters. So not all the characters speak in sort of that modern prose. Some of them will have a more old-timey way of speaking. And this is the very unique appeal of Bone, I think, is this strange combination of the cartooniness with a beautiful, heroic fantasy adventure, which you'll get the feel for just as we flip through it if you haven't encountered this. It's like Star Wars in its pace and in the adventurous elements coming in. So the other interesting thing I think about Jeff Smith's drawing style, well, obviously you can see it here. They're these strange little cartoony creatures. Like, why are they bones? I guess because they're white and they kind of have that funny shaped bone-like head to them, maybe. But they are that Sunday morning cartoon strip kind of character in a J.R.R. Tolkien style adventure story. It's incredible. Now, the reason I mention that is one of the potential dangers is that they could get lost. And we'll see it on this page. Okay, so let's zoom in on Phony Bone here. So when I first got interested in Jeff Smith, I tried drawing like this, and I'd have problems where I'd draw the expression, but then I'd lose it when I draw the background. So then I returned to Jeff Smith and paid closer attention. And look at this. None of these black lines in the background touch Phony Bone, which means that he's allowed to pop forward and be uninterrupted as a character with a silhouette. If the mountain was behind him, that would fight with the sweat beads and the eyebrows, and then it would be harder to read the character's expressions. Let's refocus that. The colors for this, I prefer the color editions. I think that Jeff Smith, you really got to look at Jeff Smith to get a good feel for balancing black and white and using detail smartly. That's the lesson you can learn from Jeff Smith, is how to use detail smartly. So they're fun to read in black and white. The colorist Steve Hamaker, I think that Bone benefits from color because it's such a rich fantasy world, and I'll praise Hamaker for using a variety of palettes based on the scene. There are a couple weird derpy moments where I think that Hamaker like forgot which character was which, or just like put something really quick in the background, because Jeff Smith loves to use white space effectively. So we're going to see that. So what I want you to pay attention to as I flip through this is, let's look at how Jeff Smith is using the black space, solid black, the solid white spaces, and the little details in the foreground. That's one of the most consistent aspects of his style. So the first chapter or so is very dialogue heavy. And if you're just looking for a good like bedtime story, you know, for kids of a certain age, like maybe like preteen kids, there's nothing in this that would, you know, be too scary for a preteen kid, then this would be so much fun to read aloud, to do the voices. But the characters' dialogue, the characters speak in such a way that each of them has a distinct voice. But what's amazing about this is, what is that voice? And you have a little bit of freedom to decide that in your head. Like, is Phony Bone, I don't know, like 14 years old? Is he 18 years old? I don't know. I don't think that any Hollywood actor could portray him. They did some cringy, crummy 3D video game based on this where they got voice actors. And it doesn't have the vivaciousness of the original, because Jeff Smith, as a letterer, always is emphasizing, you know, certain words to tell you what's the most important idea in the sentence. He's using, you know, So he writes his letters in such a way as to communicate if the character is distressed, or if, like these rat creatures, if the character is sort of creepy and speaks in a guttural tone. Every cylinder. So the dialogue of the characters, the expression of the characters, the details of the background with little marks to indicate the texture of the rock. Black for some drama, to add some darkness and atmosphere. It's just someone who loves his craft, and it comes across on every little image. When there's like a similar image over and over again, he doesn't copy paste, he redraws it, and it's subtly different. Jeff Smith loved this world, and he loved these characters, and it survives so much longer than, you know, quick copy pasted stuff. So yeah, what you see here is the dragon. As Bone enters into the valley, he encounters, you know, things he's not used to. As someone who's kind of from a modern world with modern technology, he's not used to this Tolkien-style fantasy world. So earlier I mentioned Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes, and I think one of the ways you can see that most is how Jeff Smith paces his humor. He very consistently uses the last panel of most of these pages to deliver a gag. So I think when I was a young kid, I used to believe that Bone was some kind of newspaper comic strip, because it was just, I just saw it as so similar to Calvin and Hobbes, both in the drawing style and in the creative use of panels in this vertical format. So to my surprise, years later, I discovered it wasn't a Sunday newspaper strip. It was just a graphic novel. It was intended for the indie comic market originally. Man. So what's important about that for comic book artists is, like Jeff Smith, you can learn something from newspaper comic artists. I think most comic artists focus on the comic book, and they ignore the importance of the comic strip throughout history. And comic strip artists figured out how to deliver a gag in a page with the boom at the end. And Jeff Smith learned that, and he brought that into a different context. So he's not drawing a comic strip, he's drawing a comic book, but he's learned from those people. So, okay, all right, so here's the big reveal shot. So this single panel, I think, shows you the appeal of the entire Bone series, which is these simple, bizarre little cartoon characters existing in a rich and dense world. I love Ted the Bug. So this illustrates what I mean. So when he meets Ted the Bug doesn't talk like Phone Bone does. Ted the Bug is clearly like kind of a southern hillbilly type. Hey, watch it! You almost stepped on me. And it's communicated through word choice, everything. The rat creature. I didn't like this. I didn't like how the colorist chose to have one rat creature be purple and one rat creature be brown, and later he flipped them around. Sometimes one of the rat creatures loves quiche, a French fancy dish, and in this one the quiche one is brown and later it's purple. I think it was just an honest mistake on the colorist part. I kind of wish they were a little bit closer in color, so it wasn't so obvious. But anyway, I'm getting OCD. Sorry. So what have I praised? I praised his dialogue, I praised his lettering, and I want to talk more about use of black and white. So look at this. He thinks a lot about framing his characters, giving his characters a halo or a silhouette so you can easily discern them. Look, little trees, but they stop before they reach bone. And to get that, he uses what I call feathering. No, that's not right. If feathering is when you're kind of the natural muscle memory of your hand lets you shade in a way where it sort of gradually fades out. The reason I think of it as feathering is Jeff Smith likes to remove details the closer he gets to his characters to pop them forward, and they end up having kind of a halo around them, but it doesn't read as in painting. A halo is bad because it just looks like there's a crummy outline around your image. Jeff Smith does it gradually. So, he has some of the trees fade out up here around the sound effect, and then more down here, and then the line goes almost all the way up to Phone Bone's head, but not quite. And he also knows, so earlier I showed you dialogue heavy scenes, but Jeff Smith also knows when to pull back the speech bubbles and let the images speak for themselves. And when he does that, he understands how to imply motion using little details like the fur going up and the little speckles trailing behind them. And so each one of these frozen moments becomes dynamic because we understand the speed of the chase, and then we translate that energy into each of these quiet little moments. I love this. Those rat creatures would have to be pretty stupid to follow me onto this frail little branch. Stupid rat creatures. His comedy is not dumb, random, tee-hee, let's wang it kind of stuff. Jeff Smith achieves comedy by having characters with clearly defined personalities interact with each other. So stupid rat creatures is funny because of this great, dynamic chasing build up to it, and then he's convinced that they have to be idiots, and then they instantly do it. This is a gag that only works in comics because we have to fill in the gap from here to here. It gives it a punchier feel than it would be in an animated cartoon. The Great Red Dragon, so really solid. He's constructed well. He has a really solid, easily discernible jawline. And Jeff Smith clearly, probably had drawings of the Great Red Dragon that he referenced to make sure he got the construction of the face right, because he really stays on model with the character throughout this. There's a little romance which kind of underscores, is Phone Bone supposed to be like a little kid, or is he supposed to be like a young man like Luke Skywalker? And Thorn becomes a major character throughout the series, and she's a great female character. She's a strong female character. She has weaknesses. I'd say that she doesn't have like a huge psychological drama to her that makes her absolutely unique. I'm going to be talking about some female characters like that later, but I would say that the way Thorn works is that she's a beautiful young woman. She's going to be caught up in this big epic fantasy adventure, and she's kind and caring to Bone, while also clearly she's able to kind of push back and stick up for herself a little bit. I do think Star Wars was a big influence on this series. All right, so black and white. Use of black and white for psychology. So Phony Bone, the greedy capitalist, he's surrounded in darkness, you see, in contrast to Phone Bone, who is kind of has a lighter atmosphere all around him. This sort of illustrates the color, and it's another dialogue heavy scene, so kind of like gray tones for the interiors, warm spring tones. All right, little details. So Phone Bone finds the Phony Bone, the greedy one, finds the Great Red Dragon. He starts insulting him and calling him like a pea brain. And as the dragon gets angry and angrier, his expression changes subtly. He knits his brow, he lifts his fingers a tiny bit, he curls his fingers and the smoke comes out. He curls the fingers a little bit more. In a contemporary Marvel comic book, this would have been copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. This is 6 different drawings. And that little subtle change sells the gag, because we see the buildup of the rage as Phony Bones being an idiot and almost getting himself killed, and then the release of that rage. Grandma Ben, I think, clearly shows the influence of Popeye. You know, E.C. Cigar is a wonderful cartoon. But so she has a strong Popeye vibe to her, and there's a man in the town who has a strong Bruto vibe. I think that's the big guy who's Popeye's enemy. So the comedy comes from the characters' personalities. It's easy to identify with Phone Bone if you've had siblings and you have that sibling rivalry with them. They're cousins. The Bone cousins have the strong sibling rivalry. They have very clearly defined personalities. The good one, the mean one, and the stupid one, who we meet later. You had the first chapter was used to have us laugh along with them and kind of care about them, so that now that they're separated, we want to see them get back together. And as they're thrust into this world, there are viewpoint characters. We're modern people like them. They come from this modern context. And we're along for them on this adventure in this strange world. I want to spoil every gag because I've read this so many times. It's like all of these have become catchphrases in my mind. So I'll just tell you that the gags work based on you understanding the characters' personalities and things like Phony Bone being a jerk, so that when something bad happens to him or when he says something dumb, we laugh because you've met jerks like that in real life. In contrast to Grandma Ben, where a lot of the humor for her character comes from her calm and composure while surrounded by these nuts. What else did I want to touch on? What's a good example? Okay. This is where I'm starting to make some of the connection to Bill Watterson. So Bill Watterson played a lot with panel composition in Calvin Hobbes. I think he was probably the last great newspaper comic strip artist before the format of the newspaper comic strips shrunk down so much that no one can do anything creative with that anymore. You're trying to design and set a postage stamp. So when it changes transition from, well, this is a whole scary scene, but it's a scary scene with the hooded one, kind of a Tolkien-esque Bring Wraith kind of figure, and then black boxes in the background with boxes without gutter panels floating in the foreground. Within this scene, it's sort of like a dream sequence or a memory, and the shadows stretch from the bottom to the top, connecting this with this. So everything is tying into each other, and it's sort of this unreal effect where Thorn is beginning to push forward, but then the shadows are also pushing her back. Look like in this one where it connects down to this. It's nuts. Handling of black is so critical for unifying a composition, especially in comics, because black will sometimes be the one thing that's running throughout it, and you need it to tie everything together. Read Jeff Smith and enjoy it, and read it again and look and think about how he's using black, and you'll get like a crash course on balancing your blacks with your whites. So great example. Panel composition, and then adventure. Okay, balance. Adventure. Funny stuff. Adventure. I love Smiley Bones so much. His calm demeanor has informed so much of my life. All right, so I think I've just made my point. I am so enthusiastic about this series, but it's a series that deserves to, even if you've read it and loved it, it's a series that deserves to have you return to it and read it carefully again, with an artist's eye, with a writer's eye. Look at this. So one scene of the Great Red Dragon running, we got the billowing of the cloak, the billowing of his ears, the leaves flapping behind them, and these trees in the foreground, which are obviously whipping by the fastest. They're just a haze of like motion lines. Ah, boy, oh boy. Anything else I want to touch on? Sorry, gang, dead air. All right, this is a good sample of how Jeff Smith likes to pull back. So you saw all those detailed scenes with like beautiful trees and leaves and everything. Well, he also knows how to like give us a break and show us a character interaction and not have that fight with it. So I kind of wish the colorist did this a little bit more often, where he just picked a flat color and let the characters float in front of that. Sometimes the colorist tries to like create a background behind them. What this does is it lets us focus on, oh, they're together again, hooray, you know, and you understand. It's great for comedy, and it's great for focusing in on something, and then you pull back again to all the little branches and details of that. And this is funny because this was set up on the very first chapter, that Phone Bone and Phony Bone had this love-hate relationship where Phone Bone would, risk his life to help his cousin Phony Bone because he's just sick of all his crap. What a story. So, Out from Boneville, let me know if you've never heard of this before somehow, and if I persuaded you to check it out. If you have read it, do you think you might revisit it? Do you think you might read this to a young person? I think that Jeff Smith's love of his craft has made Bone one of those comics that isn't just good, but it's one that you can return to again and again and again and keep finding things. What reminded me of this is a couple of years ago, he released a little extra chapter called Coda, and I really enjoyed it. He went out with a bang, wanted to kind of give readers who loved Bone one last little glimpse of the Bone characters before signing off and working on something else. I haven't read his other work yet, but I'm going to. But this is a work of love. The love shows up in every page, in every little interaction, and an understanding of composition that I think is unparalleled, nearly unparalleled in the world of comics, and an excellent example for cartoonists who struggle with, realism and backgrounds. I think that Jeff Smith is a good model for people who are good at the cartooning side, but not so good at the illustrating a rich world side. So much to learn from this artist. Anyway, I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. Love you guys, and I will catch you later.